Hello, everyone. What is the idea of week three of the course? Well, in the simplest way, it is a continuation of what we were doing in week two, where we're actually proceeding with the business, a specific business of the course, and that is to look at issues in the ethics of information technology, or just plain old computer ethics, is fine to call it. More specifically, we're looking obviously at this social experiment, this little bit of research that Facebook did in collaboration with some academics several years ago, in which they made some adjustments to people's feed and looked at what the results were. I have to say, I've never been a social media user of any sort, and I don't want to be prejudiced against it for that reason. I just never felt the need in my life to do so. But I'm not familiar with what it's like to really to use Facebook or any similar social media application, I guess you could call it. But more specifically, what is the idea of week two? Well, I just want to give you one thought, and that is, on the one hand, it seems very clear that we can apply the ethical decision making frameworks from week one pretty simply, pretty clearly to this case. That is, we could evaluate this on a purely utilitarian level. And I'm not saying the answer would be easy, it would have to be thought out. But we'd ask ourselves whether the outcome of this experiment or similar experiments was ultimately beneficial to the greatest good. And I'm not really clear about that. I don't know, but that would be the way to approach it. And on the other hand, if we were Kantians, especially employing the second version of the categorical imperative, we would be looking at it in an entirely different way. And I think, although one has to apply the principle involved in the second categorical imperative, but it would certainly tend towards a certain answer, I think, quite obvious answer. But again, it's not these principles, both the grace happiness principle and the categorical imperatives, they have to be applied to specific situations. And although the answer that they seem to give may seem obvious, there's room for interpretation. So on the one hand, point I want to make is, on the one hand, this is a pretty standard kind of ethical issue in which these traditional ethical decision-making frameworks seem to apply pretty neatly, pretty firmly, in the usual way, where we get different answers, and it's not clear what the right answer is, but at least it's a traditional kind of subject to apply these things. On the other hand, I think that this phenomenon, this occurrence, and the occurrence of any similar experiment, or just the occurrence of any manipulation or any use of the kind of let's say database that a company like Facebook has is absolutely unprecedented as far as I'm concerned in human history. In terms of information technology, I don't think there has ever been anything like Facebook's between 2 and 3 billion users, active users, they claim. I don't know how you determine whether somebody's active users, somebody who uses it regularly, but just that sheer number of users, let's say that it's 2 billion, that is unprecedented. And it's not just that you have 2 billion users where you have their information, you have 2 billion active users. So not only do you have the information on those people, but you have the power, capacity to affect those people's lives. I think that is unprecedented, and that is directly a result of a huge innovation of digital technology. This sort of experiment, whether it was good, whether it was bad, whether it was justified, whether it was unjustified, putting that question aside, this experiment couldn't have been made until 10, 15, 20 years ago, really until 2007 or so, when Facebook really got cooking and similar social media applications got cooking. And I don't think there is any precedent for it. I mean, people have been running psychology experiments for a very long time, but this kind of mass experiment where the technology enables you to get data from, I think there were hundreds of thousands of users in this experiment, but there clearly could have been many, many times more. An entirely new thing that we're stepping into. I don't think there have been, it's not just that there are 2 billion users of Facebook. The kind of thing that Facebook is makes those users much more accessible. If a company has 2 billion customers, that's one thing. Somebody goes to a store and buys something. If a company has the kind of customers that Facebook does, who are constantly using the site, putting up their personal information, subject to a news feed or whatever kind of feed, that's a different sort of customer. And having 2 billion of them creates new possibilities and definitely new dangers. So on the one hand, I want to say this is a very traditional looking subject for the application of traditional ethical decision-making frameworks. On the other hand, we have what seems to be an entirely new phenomenon. What exactly that means, I'm not completely sure, but I think it's a good thing to keep in mind.